Hey, this is Dave from metalepidemic.com. Thank you for checking out our YouTube video. Please feel free to hit the subscribe button below if you like this type of content, and we hope you enjoy the review. What's up guys, Dave and Duncan here from Metal Epidemic, back for another album review. And for this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Rotherham based sludge trio Swamp Coffin.
Great name.
Indeed. The band's new album, Noose Almighty,
Better name.
will be released on November 26th via APF Records.
Oh man.
So, these guys have been active since around 2016, and Noose Almighty will be the band's first full-length album. They also released an EP back in 2019 called Flat Cap Bastard Features.
Love these guys, I really do.
They are musically rooted in 90s Nola sludge, but with strong nods to Sabbath groove and even death metal elements. The new album covers everything from depression, trauma, grief, betrayal, and a general disenchantment with the world. The album was recorded, mixed and mastered by Owen Claxton at Top Floor Audio Works and produced by Owen Claxton and Swamp Coffin. The album was recorded in only 3 days, and the band had rehearsed the material to death beforehand so they could record efficiently and, more importantly, leave time for their usual mad experimentation and layers, which takes a record from being great to something truly special.
And the Jaeger bombs. So.
And yes, indeed, yeah, the Jaeger bomb.
Hopefully the Jaeger bombs.
Completely new band for me. I had never heard of Swamp Coffin, although weirdly it was one of those things that, like, once I'd put this on the review pile, I started seeing their name everywhere. It was like fucking Facebook was reading my thoughts or something. Like
It's probably an algorithm doing things there, Dave.
I think they might have access to our spreadsheet, you know that?
I mean, you look at Lube one time on Amazon and every time I scroll through, it's like, are you pleasing your partner?
I did notice that they are supporting the mighty Conan this month, though.
That's a great fit. That's a great,
cool.
that's a great fucking fit.
Yeah, it is.
Could you imagine how dirty that gig's going to sound?
That's pretty filthy, yeah.
Oh.
They obviously have their name out there already, even though this is just their debut album. Noose Almighty. So it starts with a track called Your Problem. And like here from the get-go in this, there's no airs and graces with these guys. They play dense, filthy sludge, and they lay it all out there on that first track. Actually, the first thing that caught my attention on the opener was the bass tone, like real thickness to it, a real kind of clank kind of sound to it.
Absolutely no wiggle room in the production here, by the way.
No.
like there's no space at all, no room to breathe.
No, not at all. Even though like the guitars are up front and like weighty, the bass cuts through. Like it's a hell of a low end, but it's got enough presence to be completely audible in amongst all the.
Did you say they were a three-piece?
Yes, I think that.
Which would make sense then.
Yeah, trio. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where to start with this one? I think the riffs are fairly what you'd expect from a kind of sludge band. Like nothing more, nothing less. Very corrosive and kind of switching between the slow grooves and the even slower kind of chugging sections. Reminded me, in places of like old kind of Mastiff. Maybe when they're kind of slowest, or a slightly less kind of abrasive, like Primitive Man. You can hear them going through a slight change though. Like Jaeger Bombs Away gives off a wee bit more of that kind of Nola vibe. Like the tails and some of the riffs have a bit more of a kind of southern tinge. Not a million miles away from a band like She that we just reviewed like a month or so ago.
Yep.
It doesn't like fully commit to the Nola sound, but it definitely has some of the characteristics. This track I did find more interesting than the opener. I particularly like the kind of solos and offer here. They helped kind of break the track up a bit before hitting you with that kind of end riff. And then as the album goes on, I felt like a bit more of that Nola vibe started to come through. Like you can hear it starting to come through on like Barbarian Windsor, probably one of the ones that was kind of most influenced by that sound. And you can start to hear little things that maybe like remind you of like Church of Misery or like Bongzilla or something like that. The riffs definitely had a more kind of upbeat feel in comparison to that kind of opening track. The title track was a little different again, going for something with a bit more kind of contrast, some cleaner tones to begin with before like building to something heavier. And I think like the placement of that track was perfect. I felt like a kind of middle of the album type track that breaks up the two halves. The last two tracks, I don't know what it was. They kind of felt nothing out of the ordinary. You know, like they delivered the heaviness in spades. They just didn't necessarily have any moments where there was kind of anything different happening. There's like a short kind of clean section in the middle of Welcome to Rot that was kind of cool. Added a bit.
It reminded me a little bit of Mastodon actually.
All right,
like
cool.
Earlier Mastodon. Yeah. So
I thought that kind of added a little bit kind of light and shade to the track. But I don't know, it was a little bit forgettable for me. Production is like as you'd expect for this type of album. You know, it's abrasive. It's got plenty of punch. It's not overly polished, which suits the sound.
I believe the kids call it dank.
Right, okay.
No, I don't know. I'm just making up shit. I'm hoping these things will stick.
Cool.
So when it's used in a review somewhere down the road, I'm like, they fucking stole it from us, Dave. We were here for. We used dank first. We used it better.
Yeah, it's dank. But you know, everything is well balanced in the mix. As I mentioned, I really liked the placement of the tone of the bass on this, which is an instrument that is hugely overpowered by the guitars in Sludge albums most normally, but I liked where they had it on this one. I think for me, I liked the kind of chunk in the middle of this. I think it was probably my favourite kind of part of the album. The start and end for me were the segments where I felt the album was kind of least interesting. It's heavy as balls and it sounds colossal in parts, but musically I felt like there wasn't quite enough to just kind of grab my attention. I probably preferred the more kind of Nola kind of inspired material, and the title track had quite an interesting kind of structure, the way they built up the track. It's a good release, but in a year where we've had albums from bands like Mastiff and I Hate God and Black Sheep Wall and Erdve, it maybe is not quite as unique as some of those. But I think as debuts go, I think they are definitely showing some potential here.
Yeah, and that's where I would like all those other bands that you mentioned all have years on the clock. You know what I mean? These guys don't necessarily, and I think I liked this more than you.
Okay.
To me, I just loved how. I mean, you're right. It doesn't necessarily deviate from the plan much at all. But then there's part of me that I've said it before. There are certain genres and certain styles of music where I am fully open to forgiving that. And Sludge is one of those. Like, I can listen to like about an hour's worth of barely changing Sludge music, you know what I mean? Like, and still be happy at the end of it. There's something about the kind of groove and almost kind of hypnotic repetitiveness of that genre that works really, really well for me. So when you get tracks like Knuckle Dragger, which is like it's 8 minutes long, so strap yourself. That's a long Sludge song. Strap yourself in for it. That time flies for me. I know what you're saying. I'd like the Nola stuff is kind of cool to listen to. They're not a Nola band, and I always I feel weird about like bands that clearly are not, you know, not even in the same country, trying to like. I like bands to put their own spin on things. I think they do enough of that here. It does have a kind of Nola vibe, but it's certainly not trying to be like a Corrosion of Conformity or, you know, like an I Hate God like we mentioned earlier on. I think vocally it's great. I think he's got a great tone. He kind of reminds me a little bit of the kind of angrier, heavier style of the old Hatesphere vocalist. He's just got like this kind of really menacing grit about him, which works really, really well. Production's fucking great. I mean, this production is how this band should sound. Yeah, you know, it does sound like they were all crammed in the shittest fucking room ever, with, you know, enough mics to record the album and no more. And I love that idea, the kind of the kind of old school idea of we don't have the money for a month in the recording studio. We've got 3 days, so let's make sure before we hit that room we know what we're fucking doing. And I love that idea as well. I think they're at their best when they fully commit to the grooves in their sound. I think that's when they're at their absolute best, when they're like their full viciousness. I think where they lose a little bit of something is that I think there is a dynamic element, specifically in the guitars, specifically in the I think if they introduced a little bit more of not melody, but something to just brighten up some of the tracks a little bit, I think they'd be really onto something here. You're right, like this particular genre of music is going through a little bit of a renaissance this year, where bands that haven't released anything in a while are returning to kind of that Black Sheep Wall album is fucking immense. But even bands like we've mentioned before, I Hate God, have come back from a bit of a hiatus and released a really stellar album that shows like a kind of quirkiness, the playfulness, but also a groove side of it as well. But then again, I also acclimate that to one, where they are in the world, two, that they've deliberately went for a snarly kind of disenfranchised sound, and it's in this album. You can feel it seeping out it. And three, this is their first album. Right? Yeah. I mean, this is their first album. As first albums from sludge band goes, this is really fucking good. This is really, really good. But touring with bands like Conan will only strengthen them. I bet you these guys are fucking great live. There's nowhere to hide. There's one, nowhere to hide in Sludge. Two, there's nowhere to hide if you're a three-piece. Has to sound as disgusting as this, or what are we doing? So I think there's a whole lot to celebrate on this album. I don't think it's the best Sludge album I've heard this year, but from a band that, one, I've never heard of before, two, are kind of technically homegrown talent, and three, are kind of starting to feel out the sound and the scene and all the rest. I think they've done really, really, really well, and I am very much interested to see what we have in the future for Swamp Coffin, because the component parts are there. You listen to it, they've got the production, they've got the song structures, they can play the grooves. It's all in there. There's just there's something somewhere that just needs to be added, I think, to make it completely shine. I'm not entirely sure I know what it is, and I'm not entirely sure even if I did, the band would listen to me. So and it's not my place to do that. It's a great album. It's another one of these ones where I'm kind of giddy that the British music scene is still just continuing to churn out new, exciting, great talent. So
cool. Ratings for this new one from Swamp Coffin. I agree. I think they have real potential, and I'm definitely looking forward to hearing what they do next. But for me, I think it's about halfway there. Living on a prayer. But it's heavy, and it sounds great production wise. I think maybe a little bit more time honing their craft, we'll get a much kind of stronger release from these guys. I liked the Nola thing. I think that was probably my favourite part of this release, but it's something that's been done to death as well. There's it sounds like a lot of other bands. So I think just a little bit more tweaking here and there. I definitely think they'll be on something. I've definitely got my eye on them. For this one, at the moment, it's probably a 3 out of 5 for me. What are you thinking?
I was right, marginally higher than you, 3.5 for me. I'm very excited. I genuinely cannot wait to see what they do. I think they've also got the humour, which doesn't come through in their music. It's in the song titles, for sure, but they obviously have a wry, dark sense of humour, which maybe that's what, I don't know what there's just something, there's just something, just when that goes in there, it'll all just explode. But yeah, like if you're in the mood for some gnarly, dank, we're using it again, dank sounding sludge, Swamp Coffin, Noose Almighty. I say it a lot, maybe my favourite name of an album this year. It's just so good. And like I said to you before we started recording, feel free to steal my idea. Have Jim Carrey being hung from a tree. t-shirts will fly off the shelf. You're welcome.
Okay. So Noose Almighty drops on November 26th on APF Records. I will put links below to the band's Facebook and to their Bandcamp so you can check out the pre-order. Let us know what you think. If you've heard any of the songs, drop some comments in below. Happy to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. That is the review. Thank you for checking it out. Much appreciated. We'll be back with another review very soon. But until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.